we hack the code and flip the tag. Where cliches come to retire. Drop that beat, turn down to fire. Say what's real, make fears take a seat. Unconventional wisdom, dancing on your feet. Hey.
Hello and welcome to Unconventional Wisdom about conventional wisdom. I'm your host, Kim Miller-Hershon. I can't wait for you to meet Alain Cohen. And let me just tell you a little bit about him before we get into it. Okay. Alon is a senior executive, CEO, and transformational leader with over 2 decades of experience in logistics, supply chain, consulting, and AI-powered operational excellence. He has led multinational organizations across Europe and beyond, managing large profit centers, complex teams, and high-stakes transformations. Known for a combination of strategic vision with hands-on execution, Alon helps organizations scale profitably through innovation, digitization, and strong leadership. Welcome.
Thank you very much for hosting me.
Yeah, I'm excited for this conversation. So, the first question that we are all dying to know the answer to. So, when you were at Club Med in the Maldives, who did you happen to run into?
That was a very unexpected encounter. I met Buzz Aldrin on a dive boat. He was cruising on a large cruising vessel and he wanted to have a dive. So he came to the island where the Club Med was, and he came an afternoon to have a dive with us. He was very humble and discreet, and I really learned who he was as if he had confided in us through the discussions. And it was really surprising. Perhaps as American, you know him better. I knew him by name. But I must say that as he's not really very often in the media, I did not know how he looked like. So it was a real surprise. Just for the sake of the story, he was already 70 years old. I was quite surprised that he was diving. And politely, I asked him for how long he was diving. And he confirmed that he started diving in 1948 in Libya and said, "How come?" He said, "Okay, it was in an army program." "Oh, you were in the Navy?" "No, I was in the Air Force." "Air Force? Scuba diving? What's going on?" "Yeah, I was working on a special," he said, he was working on a special project dealing with space. And he said, "I'm Buzz Aldrin." And so it was really an amazing exchange. That was already 25 years ago in the early 2000s. Yeah.
Yeah. I actually just heard on the news recently that the United States is sending a manned space capsule to orbit the moon for the first time since early 1970s, and in 2 years they're going to try to do a manned lunar landing again. Yeah, very timely story.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. All right, let's get into the meat of our unconventional discussion here. And the first question I have for you is around a piece of conventional business wisdom that you followed early on and only to realize later that it was completely wrong for you. And I think I'm really curious to know either what the expectations were from your either family of origin or as a young person, just looking at the business people around you that you saw as being successful, and who did you think you had to be?
I was excited in my career with business development, and I started with business development. And early in my career, I was told to say yes to everything to maximize opportunities. It sounds like good advice, but in reality, I discovered that it's a trap. I learned later on that saying yes too often dilutes your focus, weakens your standards, and ultimately limits your impact on things. And the real discipline is learning what to say no to and being consistent about it.
Right.
At some point, I made a deliberate decision, also no compromise on respect, whether internally or with clients. I walked away from business relationships that were economically attractive but unhealthy from a respect standpoint. And each time it happened twice, really, in my career in a very significant manner, when I had to walk away from really economically impacting customers. But each time, believe me or not, it freed up space for better opportunities and finally better outcomes. And one of my favorite mantra is you can bleed with the sheep and run with the wolves. And I think that I need, in fact, learning to say no sometimes helps to progress. So if I remember, that was on really the first time when I was a younger business development guy, to say, no, I'm not going to follow what I'm told to do. Yeah.
Right. And I think often if you're in business development and sales, you have goals that you have to meet, right? You have revenue targets. So, and if you own your own business, you have mouths to feed or yourself bills to pay. It was interesting. I don't coach solopreneurs anymore, but back in the day, I remember telling somebody who I was coaching the fact that you have to pay your mortgage is not your prospect's problem, right? So,
Yeah,
in other words,
sure.
like the fact that you need to close sales is not because you have goals to meet, but you're saying the opposite, which is really you have to learn when it's really not good business. My husband was a sales guy, and here's the other thing about saying yes to things that stretch the operational capacity of your org, which is, and you will love this because he was actually in logistics as
No.
well. They wear literature back in the day. We don't do that so much anymore. But he would say, "Oh yeah, sure, we can do that." And then he would take it to his operations manager and he would be like, "We cannot do that." And then my husband would be like, "I sold it. You're going to have to figure out how to do it." And oh my goodness, talk about creating tension.
Yeah, sometimes it pays off because sometimes you want to start a new business
Right.
and the people around you don't believe it's worthy or they are not used to do in this way, but you accept this new business because yes, you see it as a game changer. And if you want to change the result, sometimes you need to change the X of the equation and you need to convince people around you to manage differently. That has also to do with change management. I think that's something a bit different.
Yeah, it is.
And also, from my former experience, I was telling you, very early, I realized that, as we say, turnover is vanity. So the matter is not to make business with customers, is what remains afterwards. It's the results, the net results. And sometimes it's heartbreaking. You need to stop a relationship with a customer for different reasons. And what I experienced, one of the reasons as you said, I was in the logistics, so I was in the service industry. So I was paid to say yes to customers and to find solution as a service provider. And it was really heartbreaking to stop the relationship with a customer because that was really not in my deep mind. I was attracted to say yes, but finally, sometimes I experienced that it was really toxic. And whereas it was really heartbreaking, what I wanted to say is each time I took this type of difficult decision, it freed time and finally it paid off higher than what I lost with this difficult decision.
You make
And
you make such a good point because I think sometimes we can't see past the immediate, right? And I
mm,
don't want to lose the point. I know I went off on a little tangent, but I don't want to lose the point of the wisdom of really what you offered, which is there is a maturity and a real sort of sense of the bigger picture to be able to say no in the short term. And then what
mm,
you just talked about, which I think oftentimes is so hard to see when you're in it, which is the opportunity cost, right? Of saying
mm.
yes to things that are really not good fits for whatever reason, and then not being available for the things that are the right fits. Yeah, good point. All right.
And also taking really time and using the bandwidth and not being available for more valuable things afterwards. Yeah,
Exactly. Yeah.
yeah. So that's
All right.
sometimes difficult decisions to make. Yeah.
Exactly. As a successful leader, what's one thing that people, when they look at you, they think you've got it all figured out on the outside, and on the inside, you are still wrestling with it?
First of all, I would like to come back on the notion of successful leader. Yes, I had some success that created also a great emotion, especially when you sign game changers with customer. There is a lot of pride for yourself or for your team. But I also faced difficulties and I also had to change path. Overall, I'm really satisfied with what I've delivered, but that's part of the past, right? What matters is really future, and I don't feel I'm successful yet in this new AI development challenges that I've gone to recently. But I'm not comfortable with comfort zone, right? So I wanted to go into this AI phase in my career, and I'm not successful yet. So I'm still not a successful leader. Anyway, coming back to your question, I think people often assume that with experience, you eventually eliminate doubt in decision making.
Mm.
And that was not really my experience. Doubt never really disappears for me. And especially when you operate in complex and high stakes environment, I think what changes is your relationship with doubt. Today, I make perhaps decision faster, not because I'm more certain about things, but paradoxically, because I'm more comfortable with uncertainty. I think I rely on facts, I rely on data, on structure, and I don't wait perfect clarity to move forward because I don't believe that perfect clarity exists. And another favorite mantra is don't put off until tomorrow what you can do today, because even if there are doubts and things won't be perfect, it's better to go into the action. Yeah. So I think that's perhaps managing doubt, moving forward with doubt, rather than trying to eliminate it. I think it's what I've learned. Yeah.
Yes, I think, wow, yes, I think trying to be certain all the time is just a pursuit that's never going to really manifest. And I think it's so wise to feel like you are at the point where you got as much certainty as you're going to find. But here's the other thing is that you actually can't know until you do something, and then you'll get the feedback and then you'll know,
Mm-mm.
right? You may
Eh,
even think, but until you do it. And here's, although this is a different example, but I am a planner. So I'm going to take it into the personal for a minute. If we are going to go on a trip, for instance, I have every detail planned out because that's just logistically. I don't have to actually, interestingly enough, I don't have to know, in fact, prefer not to have every minute booked with things because I'm a great explorer and I want room to figure it out. But the how we're going to get to the airport and how we're going to get to the hotel and like those kinds of logistics and trains and all those things. We were in Italy a couple of years ago and we rented a car in Florence to go down to Tuscany and drive around, and I waited in line for, I don't know, maybe 20 minutes only to find out that we were actually in the wrong car agency. What a dummy. But
Okay, you were on vacation, so time
yeah,
did not really matter
yeah. But
at that
I
time.
I think my only point is like you can have it all planned out and it can still not work out the way that you intended
Yeah,
it to do.
yeah. But that was really amazing because each time people could not realize that I was doubting so much and constantly. As a leader, you expect that you have no doubt and you know how to proceed and so on. And that's absolutely not the case. And this is not what, and I think doubt made me successful as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, oh, yeah. Because going into everything with the attitude that you know everything you need to know, right? Or
Mm,
thinking that you've just got this totally nailed, oftentimes when things do go awry, it's devastating
mm.
because you don't have a
You're
plan
right.
B.
Yeah.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, if you could rewrite the rule book on leadership, what do you think we should throw out and what should we replace it with?
It's a bit as coming from my previous answer is I would immediately discard the idea that a leader must have all the answers. I think the model of a leader leading with having all the answers and asking the teammates to follow is really outdated. And it's frankly inefficient in today's really complex environments. I think the role of a leader is not to be really the smartest, even the smartest person in the room, but to create the conditions for collective intelligence to emerge, asking the right question, encouraging challenge, and enabling others to contribute better answers. That's really about collective intelligence. And frankly speaking, this is something I've always been comfortable with. I've never felt really the need to pretend I knew everything. Paradoxically, again, I think that's one of the reasons I've been able to build really strong engagement and deliver consistently with my teams, and also winning really nice game changers during my career. Yeah, the leader with his doubts, with asking the team, with promoting also his teammates. Recently, I made a business call and I was attending this call with one of my former colleagues, a guy who started his career with me and now is a business leader in a very famous luxury good company in France. And he told his boss, so the guy is head of transport and logistics today. And his boss is N+1, is the supply chain VP of the company. And in introduction of our meeting, he told to his boss, if I'm here today, it's thanks to this guy talking about me. So that's really a real pride, saying he has progressed because he got the opportunity also to express himself and he was promoted in what he was doing, and that's a lot of satisfaction from my side to
Right.
contribute to that. That really makes sense in a career or in a business life, I would say.
I think you bring up a really interesting point here that I think gets missed a lot of times. When I do a lot of work on delegation and helping leaders delegate better and delegate well, one thing that I often have to remind them is that one of your primary responsibilities as a leader, I think everybody knows that the work needs to get done, the projects need to get completed, the revenue needs to come in, whatever your contribution is to that piece of it. But I think what leaders often forget is that their primary responsibilities is also to develop the people on their team. Also, if somebody is getting promoted, it's because you gave credit where credit was due.
Exactly. Yeah.
And I think that it sounds like a no-brainer. Well, of course, but I got to
Mm.
tell you, I can't tell you how many rooms I've sat in where it was a team effort, or you had delegated the task to someone who then did the work, and have the leader stand up and then you get praise, right? Like, you completed that project so beautifully, and your response is thank you, as opposed
Mm,
to that was
mm,
really Alon's contribution, right? He did,
mm.
right? You have to have a pretty healthy ego to be able to have enough confidence in yourself that you can give credit to somebody else. That realize that it actually raises both of you up, as opposed to making you sound like you couldn't do the job.
Yeah, exactly. A few years ago, I had to implement a real big business with Airbus, the airplane manufacturing company. And in order to test the robustness of our setup, we went in a kind of game with role. And
Mm-hmm.
very early in the game, they made me dying on a car accident in order to see how the team would manage without me. So it was a bit shocking in the first instance, but they were right, because that's the real role of a leader, is that building a robust organization, or
Mhm.
leading in order to have robust organizations that can manage also without the
Right.
leader, always without the leader. And
Right.
that's also more comfortable in the times of vacation, for instance. But this I
Right.
discovered really later in my career.
Yeah.
I was really workaholic for a long time, and the vacations did not really mean leaving the pencil on the desk and leaving behind. I experienced that with more maturity afterwards. Yeah.
Although that is very much right. A millennial and Gen Zs, they go on vacation and they disconnect. I think
Mm.
we are the ones who have much more of an issue for that. And I'm trying to learn it from them how to do that better. It's interesting that you say that. I can take a proud mama moment for a minute. One of my daughters is works in tech, and as often happens when you're in a small tech company, she got
Mhm.
promoted to director very early in her career. And her company got bought by a private equity company, and she was a director at the time. She had three people reporting to her, and they laid off all the directors. So that whole layer was gone. So she obviously was getting laid off. And what's really interesting is that she insisted that she have a meeting with the EVP before she left to talk about each one of her direct reports and the qualities and how they could best be utilized in the company, in the structure that was going to be. And the EVP was just blown away. He had much more experience, right, in the job market. He said, in the whole time that I've ever been in a tech company, I've never had anybody who's getting laid off make a plan for their people, right? And it's so funny because I think my daughter was like, of course I'm going to make sure that they're okay. Right. Yeah. So that's my proud mama moment. Yeah.
Yeah, you can be. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. All right. You're really charting new territory here, right? What's one unconventional habit or mindset shift that's helped you grow your business in the past? But even maybe even more targeted of a question is to be able to go from working for other people and being successful to now doing this new venture. What have you had to shift either your mindset or your habits in order to grow what you're currently growing?
I think very early on, I made a conscious decision not to optimize the short term, even when it was tempting and sometimes also expected by my. And I think the sometimes we say we need to catch the low hanging fruits, but I think the low hanging fruit can taste bitter sometimes. I think instead, I have invested in what does not really pay off immediately, but culture, demanding recruitment, strong value proposition, more complex value proposition sometimes, and operational excellence that takes time. And it sometimes creates tensions because these choices don't always align with the short term financial pressure, but over time, they systematically create stronger and more sustainable performance. And also, as I was in the service industry, that means a lot for me. And I've always believed that financial results, they are a consequence, not an objective, as we see very frequently now. And the same goes with my professional career. I did not really reach a leadership position because I wanted to be a leader, but as a consequence of my achievements, step by step. And if I had to summarize, I learned to slow down in order, in fact, to go faster and build before scaling and not accumulating without really a structure and sustainable organization.
Yeah.
Yeah, and as I told you, for me, service for customers means a lot because that is engaging trust. And as perhaps from the logistics industry is highly competitive activity, there is really high competition. And I've always believed that customer satisfaction was not enough. Satisfaction is really fragile and it does not guarantee the loyalty of the customer. And I was always aiming for something stronger that I call customer delight. And there is a big difference between satisfaction and delight. It's about emotion, but it's creating trust, attachment, and long-term retention. And for me, I've always preferred long-term than short-term. But delight is also demanding. It cannot be improvised. It does not come with shortcuts from one day to another.
Right.
And it really requires consistency, high standards, and the refusal to compromise also with the short-term gains. And and I must say that the more I went, the more I had difficulties with fighting against the short, because as you can see, we are in a more and more financial world. And short time benefits sometimes are something that is really asking. And so I think fighting against the short time, I would say, yeah.
Yeah. I think it is hard, right? Patience is hard. Not taking what's right in front of you sometimes is really hard. I'm glad everybody doesn't operate the way you are, because you'd put me out of business, because so much of my business is from all the chaos that comes from not building infrastructure before you scale. Right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Everybody's just trying to build whatever they're trying to build, and then the infrastructure comes later and it creates a lot of. As a matter of fact, you know what's funny? You'll laugh at this. I have a current client right now, who literally, I think just last week, they've got a software that they created and they got a new developer in there. And every time he tries to fix something, like, he breaks three other things, because he said this software is built like a spider web on the back end. So you touch one thing and you just can't even see what's connected and right.
Yeah.
And I just thought it was such an interesting way of thinking about it. Although he's going to rebuild it so that it actually has a structure that makes sense, that is not all intertwined in some wacky way. But that's what happens. Like, you build it here and
I've
then,
experienced that as well. Yeah. In
yeah,
a software edition, absolutely.
yeah, crazy. All right, I have one last question for you. In the current iteration of Alain Cohen, if you are going to feel imposter syndrome, so that kind of trigger or the lack of confidence, what is a situation that might bring that up for you? And when you feel, and you talked about doubt before, when you feel doubt, what do you do to get yourself moving forward again?
Yeah, for me, as said before, doubt is permanent and always even tends to intensify when I reach a new level, when I'm out of my comfort zone with new markets, with a change of scope and unfamiliar environments and so on. So I think over time, I've really stopped seeing it really as a problem. I see also as a signal that I'm progressing and that I'm stepping outside of my comfort zone. So rather than trying to eliminate it, as I said, I try to manage it very pragmatically. I go back to the facts, to the results. That's summarizing also what we have said earlier, because I surround myself with people who can also challenge my thinking. So, in that respect, I am also applying some strong methodology. I've been trained in 2004 to the Lean Six Sigma DMAEC methodology, and that has helped me a lot in order to go with facts. So today, I really don't fight imposter syndrome, or I'm not embarrassed with the behavior and that could generate an imposter syndrome. I use it as an indicator that I am exactly where I need to be, in fact. Yeah. I think it's the imposter syndrome is more present when you really behave, or I try not to behave but to act, and to be absolutely comfortable with my doubts. So
Yeah, I love that reframing that as opposed to thinking that doubt sometimes somehow means that you're not competent, you're like, if I don't have doubt, I'm not pushing far enough.
exact.
I love that reframe. It's a really healthy and helpful way of looking at things.
And that's also generated big opportunities for me in my career. In 2010, at that time, I was working for a company called, that you probably know, called DHL. And I was a very successful general manager in France for DHL. And through the implementation of this Airbus program I was referring to earlier, I realized that I was not international enough, because
Mm.
Airbus was definitely a global business. So I had to interact with Germans, with Brits, with US, with Spain. And I found myself too Frenchy. And I wanted to leave this comfort zone I was talking about. So at that time, I got the opportunity and the promotion to go to our EMEA headquarters in order to lead the strategic business development. And my boss asked me to focus on main and global customers. And I told him that this was not really the intention I had when I moved from this senior position and went back into business development. I wanted to go really with challenges. And I asked him, I don't know if it's the polite way to say, but I asked him to be in charge of shitty sticks instead. And one of the strategic potential customer DHL was failing with at that time was a company called Nestle. And for 5 years, through this, and so I've been given the responsibility to rebuild the strategic relationship with Nestle. And for 5 years, I did so. I did amazing things with Nestle that would take hours to, that would be another podcast, as their story. Because I just did not want to go into a senior position and taking care of big customers already well established. But instead of that, I wanted my role to be focused on customers whom we were failing with. So it was not only Nestle, it was also a famous American lab called Merck Sharp and Dome, and MSD, that DHL had lost a few months earlier. And we rebuilt a complete strategy with some colleagues. It was also, and that came from my continuous attraction with leaving my comfort zone and leaving the green lights behind. Yeah. Perhaps
I
I'm a
love
bit
that.
masochist as
Yeah.
well. I don't
Yeah,
know.
exactly. Right. Let's just step right
But
in.
there is nothing I can do about it. That's the way I am.
Yeah, oh my gosh. I love that. That's the perfect place to end here because I think that it's such an incredible story about you. And I love that. All right. You have been listening to Unconventional Wisdom about conventional wisdom. I'm your host, Kim Miller-Hershon. We've been talking to Alain Cohen and just some great stories today and some great advice. And you're just an interesting guy. So that was fun.
And you.
All right. Contact information for Alon will be in the show notes. For me, I have two asks of you. One is subscribe to the newsletter. It's brief, it's weekly, it's good, and it's going to give you some actual action items to do. And then the second thing is, if you are interested in having a conversation about yourself as a leader, about the shoulds and the should nots, and the how to grow authentically. We have some webinars coming up. They are complimentary. So just sign up in the link in the show notes. And it'll also, we're doing them live. It's also an opportunity to ask questions and have a conversation with me. So I look forward to that. All right, go out there and be a better human.
Where cliches come